The Holocaust raises many questions about humanity, life, and faith. We are here today to recall, memorialize, and bear witness. We recall the events that led to the Holocaust in order to learn from them. We remember those who lost their lives. We remember those who survived and have carried the experience of the Holocaust through their lives. We remember those who helped bring an end to the Holocaust and those who liberated survivors. And we remember, lest we forget and bear the consequences. Hi, my name is Joel Markovich, CEO of Jewish Columbus. It is my honor to welcome you to the 36th Annual City of Columbus Holocaust Remembrance Program. Annually, we gather inside council chambers, but this year, in response to the global pandemic, we are bringing this program to you virtually. This program is sponsored by Mayor Andrew Ginter, Columbus City Council, and the City of Columbus Department of Neighborhoods, in cooperation with Jewish Columbus and its Holocaust Education Committee. This Holocaust Remembrance Program, in large part about educating the next generation to become a more tolerant people and remain ever vigilant. Usually, we would have had hundreds of students and their teachers join us in person for this important program. But we want to recognize all of you who are interpreting your normal class time to join us virtually. It is now my pleasure to introduce your City Council President, Shannon, to share a few words of welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Shannon, and I have the honor of serving you as Columbus City Council President. It's my honor to represent today my colleagues on council, Councilmember Elizabeth Brown, Mitchell Brown, Rob Dorrance, Shayla Favor, Emmanuel Remy, and Priscilla Tyson. I want to thank the Department of Neighborhoods, Jewish Columbus, and the Jewish Community Relations Commission for partnering together to put on this important event. A few years ago, I went to Israel with a group of young African American leaders from across the Midwest. It was a beautiful trip that meant a tremendous amount to me. While we were there, we visited Yavashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center. As you walk through the museum, you track the timeline of the Holocaust. The Holocaust started slowly. The Nazis started their assault by focusing on the dehumanization of the Jewish people, by othering the Jewish people. They spread propaganda about racial hierarchies and anti-Semitic caricatures. They changed the rules around professional organizations, barring Jews from becoming lawyers and doctors and the like. Most folks wouldn't define these acts as genocide, but they created the moral underpinnings for violence. That's unfortunately still a connection we see reverberating through our country today, how violent and racist language can manifest itself in death. While at Yavashem, small details stuck out to me. Testimony from a young child who looked forward to school even though they walked barefoot through the mud and rain to get there. Or a mother who had shared her provisions with other families even though she didn't have enough for herself. Even while subjected to the most horrific conditions, the Jewish people exhibited hesed, meaning goodness, and a commitment to others. Despite their best efforts, the Nazis couldn't destroy the Jewish people's commitment to one another. And I believe that's a message that still resonates loud and clear today. Regardless of those attempting to divide our city or our country, our commitment to one another stretches far beyond race and class. Our commitment to our neighbors and our fellow Americans, whether Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, is what makes us strong. And as we focus on what brings us together, it is so important that we never forget what happened 80 years ago. Thank you, and God bless.
The events and circumstances that led up to the Holocaust were both simple and complex. The destruction of a people does not occur overnight or without warning. Rather, it is a process that separates and demonizes a people until they are dehumanized. The Holocaust was a systematic process from discrimination to isolation from society, the stripping of civil and human rights, and ultimately genocide. The world was not completely unaware of these developments. Sadly, as Elie Wiesel stated, the world did not believe and the world stood silent. As atrocities have continued in the aftermath of the Holocaust, we are called to recall, memorialize, and bear witness to their stories, to learn from them, and to work to prevent the repetition of them. Collectively, as a society, and each one of us as individual, we have to bear witness about this responsibility. And as stated by Elie Wiesel, to remain silent and indifferent is the greatest sin of all. Therefore, we are all here today to remember, and our presence here serves as a testimony that we will not be silent. Today we bear witness to the testimony from our guest speaker, John Konigsberg. We are doing so in the halls of power, city council chambers, where we sit today, to ensure that as a community, that silence and indifference will not persist. John was born in Amsterdam, Holland in 1937, and is a child survivor of the Holocaust and an active member of the Jewish Columbus's Holocaust Speakers Bureau. He speaks extensively about his experience during the war to schools and organizations. His reasons to share his story is to educate his audiences to remember and not forget that most terrible period in our history, and that these lessons in history will not be diminished into just a footnote. Please welcome John Konigsberg.
My name is John Konigsberg, and I was born in Amsterdam, Holland in 1937 and named Joseph Konigsberg. My name was changed twice during the war, and I will explain the name changes when I come to that part of my story. I am one of the very, very lucky ones. Only 7% of children under the age of 16 survived the Holocaust. My parents luckily survived as well, but they never ever spoke about the Holocaust and about that time in their lives. I did not speak about the Holocaust until in 1994 I gave my testimony to Steven Spielberg's HaShoah project. And after I finished with my testimony, my wife said, "It's about time you told your children, and it's about time you told your grandchildren," and I've been speaking ever since. Not speaking about the Holocaust is nothing unusual. To this day, there are still survivors who have never spoken and probably will never speak about the Holocaust. 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazis during the war. Of that 6 million, 1.5 of those were children under the age of 12. An additional 5 million plus non-Jewish people were murdered. So 6 million plus 5 million, it's 11 million. A little bit of a hard concept for people to grasp, to see what does 11 million mean. To give you a little better insight, at this particular moment, the population of the state of Ohio is 11.7 million. To show you what happened to the Dutch Jewish population in Holland, as you can see by the little chart, we had a little over 140,000 Jews that lived in the tiny country of Holland. We have the very, very sad distinction to have lost more Jews in percentages than any other Western European country. We lost almost 80% of our Jewish population. This is a picture of my mom's family. Many brothers and sisters, and of course my grandparents are in front. All of these people had children. All of these people were married and had spouses, had husbands and wives. To show you what happened just to my mom's side of the family, this is what I had left. So without any provocation whatsoever, the 10th of May, 1940, Germans parachuted into Holland and almost totally destroyed our second largest city of Rotterdam. And we were told if we did not surrender, the same thing would happen to the rest of the cities. Only took 5 days. Did not take long for the Nazis to tell the Jews of Holland what was expected of them. And as early as July of 1940, we wound up with all kinds of sanctions. My mom was a registered nurse at the Jewish hospital in Amsterdam, where my dad worked as well. We only had 4 weeks to register with the Jewish Council. I wound up registering, of course, with my dad, the 4th of August, 1942, with the Jewish Council. All Jews are forced to move to Amsterdam in a Jewish quarter or a ghetto. Jews are forbidden to use the public swimming pools or the beach. Jewish children are forbidden to attend public schools. We were only allowed to go to Jewish schools. And everywhere we went, Jews are not allowed was a sign that was posted. And then the final sanctions, 1942, a couple of these things pertain to me, one of them in particular, right where it says June, it says Jews may only go shopping at specific stores and at specific times, normally between 3 and 5. When we get to that part of the story, you'll understand. This was the deportation phase. No more Jews by September of 1943. And the last phase was the sick phase, when all the people that were in the hospital, including all of the executives at the hospital, all of the doctors and the administrators, were taken to the camps as well. And the sanctions continue. Identity card for Jews must have the letter J stamped on them. As you notice, there's a J on both sides of the identification card, and in the middle portion, which is blank, my parents, both my mom and my dad, had the German word gesperrt stamped right in the middle of their identification card. They were immune to having to go to the camps until obviously that third phase, the sick phase, when they were taking all the people that worked at the hospital. We're all very, very familiar with the Jewish star. All Jews must wear a yellow Star of David with the word Jew worn on the left side of the clothing. The word for Jew in Dutch is Jood, and that's what we had to wear. That happened to have been my Jewish star. And then the final sanction, they had taken that beautiful theater, taken out all the seats on the first floor until it was totally bare, and 80,000 of the 110,000 Jews that were murdered went through, after they received their summons, went through the Dutch theater. One of the very steady persons in my life was my mom's dad. He and I were really close, very, very, very close. Both my parents worked, he didn't, so I sort of grew up with my grandfather. And in early 1943, knock on the door, and they took my grandfather away. Bothered me for many, many, many years. I now have paperwork that shows exactly what day and date he was picked up. He was taken to Westerbork, which was a transportation camp in the middle of Holland. And again, with paperwork the next day, with paperwork including his health papers, when he was put on a train to go to Sobibor. Sobibor was a death camp. Shortly after my grandfather was picked up, my dad and I needed to go to the store. This was obviously the elderly phase. I had just picked up my grandfather, but if there was still space on the cattle cars that took people to concentration camps, they picked up anybody they found on the streets with a yellow star. My dad and I were taken to the Dutch theater that I told you about before. The children were separated from the parents and taken to the crèche, cared for by nurses. And then after the children were reunited with their parents, onto the cattle cars, onto the concentration camps. My dad has shown his immunity card. He was allowed to leave. But before he left, he told one of the nurses who he knew what to do with me. The nurse had given me something and I became violently ill. She took me to one of the Nazis in charge and said, I have a very, very sick little boy here who needs to be hospitalized. The only hospital that Jews were allowed to go where both my parents worked. I was put on a gurney and ready to be operated on, and I was put to sleep, but wound up going to the operating room. I was cut as if I had a appendicitis attack, never took the appendix out, and here I finally, if the Germans came to look for me, here I am, obviously just operated on. At that time, my parents said or thought, okay, it's about time they left. It was only going to be a matter of time before it became the sick phase and they would all have to go to the camps. They decided that all three of us would split up. Can you imagine what amount of parental love my parents must have had for me, their only child, to give him up just in order to save him? Well, it's exactly what they did. That's where they took me, to a family that said they would hide me for money. Dad had made some arrangements to work for the underground, the resistance, and worked in the northern part of Holland, a little bit north of where the word Netherlands is, and helped the resistance sabotage some of the German installations. And he found a place for my mom to hide. She lived in their basement. The neighbors never knew she was there. In the 2.5 years she was there, she delivered a baby boy 1 year, and then 2 years later, a little baby girl. Unbeknownst to my parents, the people that they had left me with were not very nice. They were Dutch people who favored the Germans. And the only reason they kept me is because of the money that my parents had given them. It did not take long for the resistance to find out who these people were. They picked me up, and here's where my first name change came, from Joseph Konigsberg to Johnny van Zijl, a very, very Dutch-sounding name. Only for transportation from Amsterdam to the most southern part of Holland, because what would happen if the Germans had stopped the vehicle that was transporting me and asked for identification papers? Joseph Konigsberg sounded a lot more Jewish than Johnny van Zijl. So I was placed by the resistance to a family called Snakers, who lived in this little white house. And here's where my second name change came, Johnny Snakers. I was supposed to be a sickly cousin who came to live with them to recuperate. Not sure how well that went over with the neighbors. Here I am, a black-haired, brown-eyed little boy among all people who were primarily blue-eyed and blonde. Luckily, the neighbors never said anything. The house was occupied by Mama and Papa Snakers, Mr. and Mrs. Snakers, 3 daughters, and who occupied the second bedroom, and the third bedroom my foster brother Jan had, and I shared his bedroom. The little house only had cold running water, no bathroom. We had an outhouse in the back, no hot water, and no heat. We had a little coal-burning stove in the kitchen, and once a week, Mama Snakers heated water, which she put in a large tub in the middle of the kitchen. And we were bathed there, one right after the other. We took a bath right in the middle of the kitchen. For many, many years, I told my wife the Germans were in the hills not far from us. Hard to visualize when you don't have any pictures. And here I'd taken this picture just to show you most of these homes weren't there, but the Germans were in the hills at the bottom of that hill. That's how close they were. And many, many times, 3 that I vividly remember, the Germans came into the house looking and looking around. I hid twice under the blankets, pretending to be asleep. And once I ran in the back, through the back door, and hid in a gully. I lived there for better than 2.5 years. The people had very, very little food. Every other night I was awakened because the bombs were coming across from England to Germany, and every other night we were in the bomb shelter. The people themselves were Catholic. I could not attend public school because that was too dangerous. We did not have any public schools in the small little town I was in. We only had 600 occupants in the city, in the little town. And the next city was 10 kilometers away, and that was just too dangerous to go to school. So I went to church school. They even gave me some Catholic medallions. I still have those, as you can see. Also, I played with a little dog, Shirley, who was named after Shirley Temple. That's how we lived for 2.5 years. Very scared, bombs all over the place, and stayed inside most of the time. But I remember our D-Day as such, our liberation, which was in September of 1944. And I remember we came out of our bomb shelters. We were waving our red, white, and blue flag, which is the flag of Holland, which we weren't allowed to have, and waving the orange flag, which is the flag of the monarchy, which again we were not allowed to have as well, only to get shot at one more time. So there were still some Germans. We went back to the bomb shelter, and finally, a couple of hours later, we were free. Picture was taken right after we were liberated. Here I am, far left. My parents were not liberated yet because they lived in the northern part of Holland. And then finally, May of 1945, Germany surrenders. Took a long time for my parents to find me. My parents found me through the Jewish Commission, the 19th of August, 1945. And I remember it well. My dad came to pick me up and take me back to Amsterdam to be reunited with my mom, but I wasn't having it. I was so bonded to the Snijkers family. It took a couple of days of promises back and forth that they would have vacations back and forth, and I finally relented. Went back with my dad to Amsterdam, but I had not recognized my mom. She had changed her hair color from black to red. Didn't take long, and we finally a family again. My very first class, and these children had also never gone to class. Some of those were my age, some of those were older or younger, and we went from early in the morning to late at night to try to cram 3 years into 1 year of school. As promised, the Snijkers came to visit us. Here I am, bottom left, Mrs. Snijkers on top, then my dad. In the middle is Tony Snijkers, my foster sister, and my foster brother Jan. Continued with school, and the end of my sophomore year, we immigrated to the United States. Here I am, bottom left, my mom, my dad, and my little brother David, who was born in 1949, 4 years after the war. And in 2007, the only one that was left was Tony Snijkers, who I had been corresponding with for many, many, many years. And unbeknownst to her, a couple of years before then, I had nominated her for Yavashem, an honor that honors the righteous among the nations. It's the highest award by the State of Israel to non-Jews who acted according to the noblest principles of humanity by risking their lives to help Jews during the Holocaust. We honored them with the Israeli ambassador came down to do the honors. We had quite a feast, and here we have Tony Snakers with both honors. It's a document and a medallion underneath the picture of her mom and dad who had long passed away. They're forever in the Garden of the Righteous, Snakers, Johannes and Anne Snakers. If it was not for the bravery of Mom and Papa Snakers, my children, grandchildren, and generations to come after me would not be here. The reason I speak about my experiences and the reason we have these programs is because I believe that the lessons of the Holocaust must not be diminished into just a footnote in history. We must educate the younger generations and imbue them with the spirit of remembrance, as well as the mission to combat all forms of racial, religious, and ethnic hatred before it is too late. We must continue to confront and remind all those who really did not know, those who did not want to know, and those who don't want to be disturbed by such tragic memories, as well as those who shamefully attempt to minimize the extent of the tragedy or deny it altogether. I speak in memory of my beloved grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins who were among the 6 million who were murdered. I speak so that my voice will be heard by generations to come after me, and I speak so that we and all generations to come will never forget.
Nelson Mandela said, "Our differences are our strength as a species and as a world community." Today, as we mark this most solemn occasion, we remember the time when it was differences that led to the slaughter of 6 million people. And we remember the scar this blatant act of violence has left on the Jewish people in Columbus and around the world. Today, we must also remember that there are still countless others persecuted by blind ignorance and hatred. But we can also do more than simply remember. Now more than ever, we need to expand our ability to connect to others. We can teach that there is no them, there is only us. Here in Columbus, we respect and celebrate our differences. Differences in thought and perspective, differences in experiences and cultures, differences in gender and age. Here in Columbus, our differences make our community that much stronger, and we work to protect those who are the target of hatred and violence by creating the framework of a free and just society. This solemn occasion of Yom HaShoah is an opportunity for all of us from all walks of life to remember the lives of those who lost theirs, as well as those who were persecuted during this dark time. It's also an opportunity to honor the legacy of those who survived. This is a time to be kind, take care of one another, to speak out when we see wrongdoing, and to make sure that such horrors never, ever happen again.
To honor the memory of those murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust, we light 12 candles. 6 candles are lit to honor the 6 million Jews who were murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. When the Nazis implemented the final solution for the Jews, they also identified other groups to exterminate. We honor the 5 million people who lost their lives from these 5 communities: trade unionists, people with disabilities, LGBTQ, the Romani, and Christians. And we reserve one last candle to honor the liberators and the POWs who, despite their grave risk to their own lives, fought to topple the Nazi regime. And now Rabbi Alex Braver, Associate Rabbi at Tiferet Israel, will chant El Melech Rachamim, a Jewish prayer for the soul of a person who has died.
El Melech Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, B'malo Kedoshim Uteorim, Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim, Lenishmot Kol Achinu B'nei Yisrael, Shenitbechu Bashoah, Anashim, Nashim Vataf, Shenechneku, Veshenisrefu, Veshenergu, Shemasru et Nafsham al Kiddush Hashem, Began Eden Tehi Menuchatam, Ana Bal Harachamim, Hastirem Beseter Kenafecha Leolamim, Utzror B'tzor Chaim et Nishmotehem, Adonai Hu Nachalatam, Ve'enichu v'shalom al mishkevotehem, v'nomar amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the souls of all of our brothers and sisters who perished in the Shoah, men, women, and children of the house of Israel who were slaughtered, suffocated, and burned to ashes. May their memory endure and inspire deeds of charity and goodness in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
We can never take for granted the moral compass of our society. We must strive personally, as a city and as a nation, never to lose this moral compass. The experience of the Holocaust teaches us that we must continually be vigilant. It is particularly fitting in today's world to reflect on the potential for each of us to make a difference. For the conclusion of our program, we take you virtually to the Battelle Memorial Park, to the freedom sculpture created by Alfred Tibor, who was a local artist and member of the survivor community. Columbus Fire Battalion Chief Michael Vedra will perform a moving rendition of Taps. Thank you all for tuning in for today's program.